Surprise fans on our new podcast by saying her pet peeve about her husband is that he's chronically late. For example, we're still waiting on him to admit he's from Kenya. And as for Barack's pet peeve about Michelle, he's mad that she keeps leaving the toilet seat up.
For 20 years, you had Obama and George W. Bush's Department of Justice go easy on this guy. They didn't fully investigate the case. They didn't show any curiosity about the case. And now Donald J. Trump is asking his Department of Justice to show full transparency. And somehow that's a criticism of Donald J. Trump.
Barack Obama was sold as a once-in-a-generation leader, the man who would bridge divides and reinvent politics. But behind the polished image stood a master of style over substance. Celebrity glow masked shallow results, and the promise of transformation gave way to the comfort of preservation. When Greg Gutfeld and JD Vance weighed in, they stripped away the illusion, revealing Obama not as a revolutionary force, but as the establishment's most persuasive salesman.
Fact: Obama's now a Republican.
Everyone knows that getting rid of the deficit will require some tough decisions. And that includes cutting back on billions of dollars in programs that a lot of people care about. But what should be easy is getting rid of the pointless waste and stupid spending that doesn't benefit anybody.
Senator Vance, in Pittsburgh on Thursday, former President Barack Obama admonished black men for being hesitant about voting for Kamala Harris. I was wondering if you could contrast your approach to hesitant voters and how you tried to earn them over.
You know, first of all, I don't believe, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, whether you agree with Donald Trump or disagree with him, I don't believe in hectoring.
His myth was preserved like a sacred relic of modern politics, polished, sealed in glass, and fiercely guarded by a worshipful media that swore he was something greater than an ordinary politician. He was painted as the chosen one, the silver-tongued orator who could elevate a stump speech into scripture and transform a photo op into a cultural landmark. But when Greg Gutfeld and JD Vance began stripping away the polish, the casing cracked and what lay inside was far less divine. Not a revolutionary, but a packaged product. A brand built for mass adoration, carefully engineered to avoid accountability.
Obama and George W. Bush. If you want to criticize the people who aren't showing full transparency, you ought to go after the administrations that went easy on Jeffrey Epstein, the administrations that concealed this case for 20 years, and the administrations that failed to show full transparency. Donald J. Trump, I'm telling you, he's got nothing to hide. His administration has got nothing to hide, and that's why he's...
Greg Gutfeld led the charge by tearing into the very core of Obama's appeal, the obsession with his words. He likened Obama's speeches to a luxury car ad, glossy, elegant, and promising the ride of a lifetime. But the moment you drive it off the lot, the shine fades, the engine sputters, the frame rattles, and you're stranded on the roadside. The cadence, the dramatic pauses, the staged humility, it was all theater. Gutfeld dismantled the notion that a smile and well-timed delivery equaled statesmanship. To him, Obama wasn't the great communicator. He was the great salesman, pitching a product America never needed, then disappearing when it inevitably broke down.
Kennedy, just watching that now, so that was 2011. Him and Trump are saying exactly the same thing, but he's not saying it as well. It's like he wasn't having fun with it.
But it's like, even the name of it, he was like, and we're going to call it the cost-cutting commission because Joe Biden is going to be in charge, and everyone knows you don't mess.
JD Vance picked up the thread and cut straight to the core of Obama's legacy. His point was blunt: Obama didn't challenge the establishment, he fortified it. The candidate who promised to upend Washington ended up being the establishment's most reliable caretaker. Wall Street walked away stronger, lobbyists thrived, and America's foreign wars only multiplied. Vance underscored the bitter irony: the so-called outsider morphed into the ultimate insider, soothing voters with poetic speeches while quietly serving the same entrenched powers. Hope and change didn't merely fade away, they were sold out.
Persuading voters. Your support is not something I'm given or something I'm owed. It's something you got to go out there and work for. So one, I just don't like the tone of going in. I mean, look, the better question for Barack Obama or anybody to ask is not why black men, it's not how dare you not vote for Kamala Harris, it's maybe they're thinking about voting for Donald Trump because they're sick of being censored, they're sick of being...
Gutfeld relished exposing how the media propped up the illusion. He mocked reporters who treated Obama less like a president and more like a celebrity crush, gushing over his playlists, his basketball shot, even the cut of his suits. It wasn't journalism, it was idolatry. Every trivial moment was spun into a cultural milestone, insulating him from the kind of scrutiny every other leader faced. In Gutfeld's view, Obama wasn't lifted by policy or results, he was carried by a press corps that behaved like unpaid interns running his PR machine. His myth didn't grow out of achievements, but out of worship.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, if you listen to Obama and you look at these inorganic protests, they say you have to have courage, rally, act, resist, but they don't. For what? What is the actual issue? When Trump owns every issue 80-20 by almost every metric, from the economy to crime to immigration, where are you? The high ground maneuver of...
Greg cut through the charm and focused squarely on the outcomes. For ordinary Americans, Obama's presidency offered little to celebrate. The so-called recovery from the financial crisis propped up banks and elites, while working families were left behind. Jobs disappeared, wages flatlined, and whole communities, especially across the Midwest, were abandoned. Vance framed Obama as the president who turned his back on the very people he promised to uplift, trading real action for lofty speeches about fairness. The result was widespread disillusionment and a political vacuum others eagerly filled. Gutfeld doubled down, torching the hypocrisy of Obama's unifying image. The idea of him as a healer, he argued, was a fraud. Far from closing divides, his presidency deepened them while he stood back and let the fractures widen. Unity became just another buzzword, repeated endlessly in speeches but never backed by policy. Gutfeld skewered the absurdity of believing that polished rhetoric alone could hold a fractured nation together, reducing Obama's talk of unity to nothing more than an empty slogan.
Give us an example of an invisible woman. Look, I hate to tell the Dems, you can't just assume that you can take us back, because that assumes that you can change your opinion of us. All of a sudden you're going to reject all the misandry and the trans hysteria and all those narratives that not only made fun of male values, but objectively normal values. You want men and women to be okay with women and women showering with men in locker rooms, or drag queens reading to kids at libraries. How do you change that if that's...
JD Vance ripped into the foreign policy myth, reminding audiences that Obama's Nobel Peace Prize came before he had done anything, and his actual record was the opposite of peace. Drone strikes, regime change, and global instability became the trademarks of his foreign agenda. Vance argued that Obama wasn't a peace president at all, but just another manager of American power abroad, dressing up aggression with elegant justifications. The illusion of restraint masked a legacy of intervention, destabilization, and moral doublespeak. Gutfeld then turned to Obama's post-presidency reinvention as a global influencer. He mocked the Netflix deals, the best-selling memoirs, and the endless paid speeches, painting Obama less as a retired leader and more as a celebrity monetizing his fame. The man who once preached humility and service now paraded across the world stage, sipping cocktails with billionaires while lecturing the public about fairness. To Gutfeld, Obama wasn't a statesman, he was a lifestyle brand, selling inspiration while pocketing millions.
The left really responds to is power. The thing that they're actually going to be responsive to is the recognition that there are consequences on the other side. If they get off scot-free, if they're never investigated, if they're never prosecuted when they violated the law, then they're just going to come back and do the exact same thing again. And there are a few different ways, of course. So it's the big tech companies that were censoring conservatives. They've got to know that's not going to be allowed, and there are going to be consequences.
Vance poured fuel on the fire by tying Obama's celebrity persona to his larger betrayal. Obama's evolution into a member of the global elite, Vance argued, wasn't a transformation at all, it was the truth finally showing through. The humble everyman act was theater crafted for voters, while his real loyalties lay with the wealthy and powerful. The widespread disillusionment Americans felt wasn't an accident, it was the predictable outcome of mistaking a brand for a leader. Obama promised change, delivered continuity, and then cashed in on the myth he so carefully manufactured. Gutfeld, meanwhile, delighted in dismantling the myth of Obama's intellect. He skewered the media for breathlessly branding him the smartest man in the room, noting that his reputation for brilliance had more to do with delivery than substance. Reading from a teleprompter with smooth rhythm doesn't make you a genius, Gutfeld argued, it makes you a polished performer. And once the rehearsed elegance was stripped away, Obama often stumbled, exposing just how much of the legend was packaging. The supposed intellectual heavyweight, in Gutfeld's framing, was little more than a well-coached actor.
Ask Obama, okay, where do I apply this courage? What space do I park it in? Should I double down on trans dudes in women's sports? Should I back the attacks on ICE? Should I show courage on those things? No, it won't work. As for Mark Cuban, I don't know why he doesn't apply the same mentality that he uses on Shark Tank with Democrats. Because that was what was great about Trump, is that, he forced.
JD Vance circled back to the devastation felt by America's working class, driving home the point that Obama's presidency amounted to one long abandonment. Manufacturing withered, small towns crumbled, and while the elite toasted him as a cultural milestone, the people who once placed their hopes in him discovered they'd been sold a dream never meant for them. Vance framed Obama as the president of the elite adored in Ivy League lecture halls and Hollywood fundraisers, yet absent in the factories, farms, and neighborhoods that needed real solutions. Together, Vance and Gutfeld stripped away the glossy wrapping of speeches, symbolism, and media adoration, exposing only the cold reality beneath. Barack Obama wasn't a revolutionary. He was a salesman. His true legacy wasn't hope, change, or progress, but the lesson that charisma can disguise mediocrity, that style can obscure substance, and that millions can be persuaded to believe words alone can transform a nation. By the end of their roast, the carefully constructed myth lay shattered. Obama stood revealed not as the historic figure the media promised, but as a hollow brand, collapsing under the weight of mockery, sarcasm, and hard truth.
And of course, you've got to pay the lawfare back in kind. You've got to say to the Comeys and the Brennans of the world, of course, you got to follow the law. You can only prosecute people when they actually broke the law, but we know that a lot of people broke the law in the last administration, and they've got to face real justice, not just words, not just getting hauled before a committee in Capitol Hill. If people broke the law, they have to actually be prosecuted for it. Because I think that if they do that, if they know that the consequence for breaking the law is go to jail, then the next generation of Democrats, they're not going to be.
Gutfeld and Vance didn't just poke holes in the Obama narrative, they tore it to shreds. What emerged wasn't a portrait of a visionary, but of a man whose true skill lay in selling illusions to a world eager to believe them. And once that illusion collapsed, it could never be rebuilt. The sting of their demolition came from the way they dismantled not just Obama's presidency, but the carefully cultivated mythology that's lingered for more than a decade. For years, pundits and academics have polished his reputation, spinning even his failures into noble struggles. Gutfeld mocked this revisionism relentlessly, pointing out how every shortcoming was recast as brilliance, and every policy failure blamed conveniently on circumstances beyond his control. Vance piled on by exposing Obama's mastery of selective empathy. He could speak movingly about suffering communities, but rarely translated that concern into meaningful action. Cities racked by poverty and violence stayed stuck, even as Obama delivered soaring speeches about their resilience. The same man who could shed a tear at a podium seemed powerless or unwilling to push through reforms that might have actually changed lives. To Vance, this was the ultimate betrayal, the ability to feel everyone's pain in rhetoric, while leaving them to endure it in reality. Hope, in the end, wasn't a policy. It was a performance.
I don't blame Obama. He doesn't care.
Right.
He just wants to be left alone, get high on the beach, wake up, go for a walk, pass out, do it every day until he dies. That's what I would do. Let's talk about the most important experience that one has. Do you ever, when you're sitting somewhere and you see somebody wave at you and you wave and then you realize they were waving at the person behind you?
Yeah.
What does that feel? You have a feeling. What does that feel? It's
Gutfeld sharpened the blade by likening Obama's presidency to a slick advertising campaign. The slogans, hope, change, yes we can, sounded less like a political vision and more like taglines for a sneaker commercial. And, as with most ad campaigns, the buzz vanished once the product actually hit the shelves. Americans realized they hadn't bought a revolution at all, they'd bought continuity wrapped in shinier packaging. Gutfeld relished the irony. The man who vowed to elevate politics had instead reduced it to branding exercises and social media hashtags. A generation that should have demanded real change settled instead for empty symbolism. And when that symbolism inevitably failed to deliver, it gave way to a corrosive cynicism. Vance pushed the critique further, arguing that the disillusionment wasn't merely Obama's personal failure but a generational wound. It planted a deep mistrust that would shape politics for decades. In his telling, Obama wasn't the spark of progress, he was the spark of discontent, not by dismantling the system, but by protecting it just long enough for people to realize how completely they'd been deceived.
When Jessica brings up polling, she never does the compared to what. That's what you do with numbers. You always have to compare it to something else. But you didn't, because the Democrats are less popular than crabs on a nude beach. They're at 19%. That is historical low.
They're at 19%.
It's just, it is so bad that people, it's natural to be somewhat, disappointed in what any politician is doing, but they hate you. And then you bring up the criticism from the brosphere, the Andrew Schultz and Joe Rogan. Well, for the longest time, Never Trumpers and Democrats have been calling the MAGA movement a...
Kelly's early critiques of media worship found fresh force in Gutfeld's relentless mockery. He skewered the way late-night hosts treated Obama like a celebrity cameo instead of a president to be questioned. Every trivial moment was inflated into a headline: Obama fills out a March Madness bracket. Obama picks his favorite summer songs. Obama wears a tan suit. Gutfeld joked that if you believed the coverage, Obama's greatest accomplishments weren't in policy but in playlist curation. It was, he argued, the absurd elevation of a politician into a lifestyle brand, something the country never needed, but the press couldn't resist selling. While reporters obsessed over basketball picks and celebrity endorsements, ordinary Americans were stuck with stagnant wages, rising healthcare costs, and shrinking opportunities. Vance called it political misdirection, the magician's trick of waving one hand in the air while the other slips into your pocket. Obama didn't just rely on charisma, he weaponized it, keeping the public dazzled while the system stayed rigged against them.
The last point I want to make is, I got to say, and shocker, newsflash here, I've defended Kamala Harris once, I'm about to defend Barack Obama once. So set to the side the hectoring and the tone of Obama when he went in and talking about black voters, like whatever, obviously I just criticized.
Gutfeld's favorite strike came when he zeroed in on Obama's self-styled role as a moral compass. He mocked the sanctimonious tone Obama so often adopted, lecturing Americans about civility, responsibility, and hope even as his own record offered little evidence of progress. To Gutfeld, it was the height of hypocrisy, a man preaching accountability while presiding over banker bailouts, endless wars, and expanded surveillance. Obama, in his framing, wasn't a moral leader but a smug preacher, demanding that others rise above while he refused to lift his own hand to change the system. Vance then delivered the most devastating blow, the legacy of emptiness. Stripped of glamour, soaring speeches, and relentless media worship, there was little left to define Obama's presidency. No sweeping reforms that reshaped the economy. No foreign policy breakthroughs that changed the global order. No enduring victories to stand the test of time. What remained was a presidency remembered more for appearances than accomplishments. Vance called it the pumpkin village of politics, a facade of greatness propped up by spectacle, hiding the hollowness behind.